No bodies. No blood. Just piles of strange gray ash. For 4 months, Detective Winston Hale has ignored orders to drop the case, determined to follow the evidence. He thinks he's tracking a criminal. But the moment he steps inside Warehouse 9, the hunt turns, and Winston becomes the target. Chapter 1. Ashes and the Carnage. Detective Winston Hale didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in evidence. But as he stood in the wreckage of Warehouse 9, staring at a pile of metallic gray ash where a man should have been, the evidence was telling him something impossible. The hunt had finally found him. The air in the outer industrial sector didn't smell like fire. It smelled like ionized ozone and something heavy and bone-dry, like pulverized rock mixed with incinerated metal. Outside, red and blue strobe lights cut uselessly through the heavy curtain of coastal fog. A rookie officer on the perimeter took an instinctive step back as Winston approached, the detective's sheer alpha presence enough to command the space before he even flashed his badge. "Who is in charge of this circus?" Winston growled, his voice raspy from a decade of night shifts and cheap coffee. The young officer stammered that the fire department had cleared the deck but hadn't found a single body. Winston didn't answer. He already knew what they hadn't found. He pushed past the yellow tape and stepped into the twisted, blackened steel frame of the warehouse. The carnage was absolute. Floor-to-ceiling iron columns were sheared clean in half, their edges glowing faint orange. Concrete loading bays had been reduced to gravel. Winston crouched by a massive crater, his flashlight sweeping over the debris. There was no blood, no charred clothing, and no human tissue. Instead, swirling in the draft, were thick, heavy piles of fine gray ash carrying a faint metallic sheen under the halogen beam. As he meticulously scraped a sample into a glass vial, he felt a strange phantom itch at the back of his neck, a scent he couldn't name that smelled like ancient copper. For 4 months, he had been quietly obsessing over these anomalies across the city, bypassing official channels to get lab results that no one could explain. He pulled a worn photograph from his inner pocket, 2 friends years younger standing in front of a sunset. He traced the face of the man who had been so much like him, yet so different. Isaac always said this city had teeth. Winston was starting to think his friend wasn't being metaphorical. "You're wasting your time, detective," a cold voice rang out. Winston stood slowly, his massive frame looming over Captain Sterling. The captain didn't even look at the crater, insisting it was nothing more than a ruptured gas line and ordering Winston off the clock. Winston's dark eyes locked onto his superior with unwavering focus. He knew a gas line didn't shear 4-inch steel rebar in a clean 45-degree crosscut, and it certainly didn't turn 12 people into 50 pounds of metallic dust. He saw the flicker of fear in Sterling's eyes. This wasn't incompetence, it was a cover-up. Someone higher up the chain was pulling strings to keep the city blind. "Right," Winston grunted, adjusting his coat collar. "Home." He walked back to his sedan through the downpour, his mind already racing through the next steps of his illegal investigation. But as he reached for his car door, he froze. His alpha senses spiked, the hair on his arms standing on end. There, on the black leather of his steering wheel, sat a single perfect smudge of shimmering gray ash. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just investigating them, they were already inside his life. He turned and strode out of the warehouse, passing the flashing lights and yellow tape without a second glance. He pulled his keys from his pocket, climbed back into the driver's seat of his sedan, and slammed the door shut. Setting the glass vial of gray ash on the dashboard next to his worn notebook, Winston leaned back against the headrest, staring out through the rain-streaked windshield at the smoking ruin in his rearview mirror. 4 months of this, he thought, tapping his fingers rhythmically against the leather steering wheel as his predatory alpha instincts flared. Something is completely off. The lab cannot identify the elements, the captain wants it buried, but my instincts never fail me. I have triangulated every single site. It always happens at night. A dark, sharp smirk touched the corner of his lips as he turned the ignition, the engine roaring to life beneath him. "Let's go hunting tonight." Winston slammed the car into drive, tires screeching against the wet pavement as he disappeared into the fog. Chapter 2. The Alley and the Unthinkable. 3 agonizing months had passed since the Warehouse 9 explosion, and still, nothing. Nothing but more silent wreckage across the city, more sheared steel, and more piles of that damn unidentified gray ash. The rest of the department had moved on, whispering behind Winston's back that the scarred alpha detective was losing his mind, chasing ghosts to avoid real police work. But Winston, standing 6'2" with a jagged scar running along his jawline from an old alleyway brawl, wasn't the type to care about whispers. He sat in a corner booth of a dimly lit dive bar on a Tuesday evening, nursing his second neat bourbon while his hand-drawn map lay open on the sticky wood table. Then he saw it. Through the rain-streaked window, a shadow crossed the street, a dark, jagged blur that distorted the streetlights as it passed. Winston tossed a 20 on the counter and stepped out into the damp night. His boots made no sound as he rounded the corner into a pitch-black, dead-end alleyway between two abandoned textile mills. He slipped his hand into his heavy wool overcoat, gripping his .45 service weapon as he moved deeper into the shadows. What he saw at the end of the alley shattered every boundary of his reality. A group of towering 7-foot-tall men in heavy, unmarked military tactical gear were locked in brutal combat with another group of massive figures in dark tactical leather. They moved with terrifying, unnatural speed, their blades clashing with a sound like thunderclaps. Every time one of the dark-clad figures was struck through the heart, their body didn't bleed, it burst into a brilliant pillar of orange flame and instantly collapsed into a pile of gray ash. Winston froze, his back pressed against the wet brick wall. He had never believed in myths, but here it was, rendered in bloody detail. "Hold the flank," a deep, commanding voice roared. Winston tracked the chain of command as the massive leaders, Cole and Frederick, directed the assault. Pushing forward at the tip of the spear was a younger warrior, Leo, moving like a fluid, lethal monster in his tactical gear. Winston reached for his phone to capture the impossible scene, but the screen instantly flashed a warning. NO signal/frequency overload. He realized then that the two compact, dark metal beacons positioned on the ledges above were tactical jamming devices, a military-grade blackout. These guys weren't just vigilantes, they were an elite army. Realizing his phone was useless, Winston shoved it back into his pocket and clicked off the safety of his .45. But as he stepped up, his boot caught a rusted iron pipe. The loud clang echoed through the alley. 3 of the dark-clad attackers snapped their heads toward him, their eyes glowing an unnatural, terrifying red. 2 of them broke away, sprinting toward Winston with silver blades raised. Winston didn't panic, his alpha instincts took over. He kicked his stance wide and squeezed the trigger. The heavy gunfire thundered through the tight alley, the high-caliber rounds staggering the monsters and buying Winston precious seconds. "Behind you, Leo," Winston roared. One of the attackers had flanked a dumpster, dropping from above with a silver blade aimed at Leo's neck. Winston fired 3 rapid shots, throwing the creature off balance mid-air. That split second was all Leo needed to spin and drive his own blade through the attacker's sternum. As the last pile of dust settled, the alley fell into a ringing silence. Leo turned toward Winston, his expression a mix of awe and caution. "Human, who the hell are you?" Winston stepped forward to answer, but a searing, blinding heat ripped through his side. A stray silver-edged blade, thrown in the final seconds of the fight, caught him deep in the ribs. The dark corruption in the blade flared, and the pain hit him like a freight train. His vision went black and his knees buckled. Leo lunged forward, catching the massive human before his head hit the stone. "He's down. Commander, he took a silver blade meant for me." Frederick stepped over the piles of dust, taking in the empty shell casings and the smoking silver wound on Winston's torso. "He fought like a seasoned warrior and covered Leo's flank," Frederick said, his voice calm and decisive. He looked at Cole, who gave a firm, respectful nod. "He won't survive silver poison without specialized treatment. We're bringing him back to the compound. Move him to the transport, have Ren prepare the medical bay immediately." Chapter 3, Blood, Ashes and Secrets. The heavy armored transport tore through the rain-slicked industrial grid, tires screaming against wet asphalt as Cole pushed the engine to its limit. In the back, the air was thick with the copper stench of fresh blood and the sharp, toxic tang of burning silver. "Keep pressure on that wound," Leo shouted, his gloved hands pressed firmly against Winston's ribs. Blood was already pooling through the detective's heavy coat, laced with dark, smoking veins of silver toxicity. His pulses spiking. Cole barked from the driver's seat. "Frederick, call ahead. Tell Ren we're arriving with a critical human, silver penetration to the thoracic cavity." By the time they slammed into the underground loading bay, Ren was waiting with a trauma gurney. His gentle demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. The rush into the ore was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights and the clatter of stainless steel. Winston's consciousness flickered in agonizing fragments. The ceiling lights strobing past, the cold bite of surgical shears and Ren hovering above him. "He's in ventricular fibrillation," Ren reported sharply as the monitors shrieked. "Charge to 200. Clear, thump. The heart monitor flatlined into a solid, chilling tone. Inject the silver binding chelator. Ren yelled. Charge to 300. Clear. Another violent thump, and a long, agonizing second passed before a ragged spike hit the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Ren exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. Stabilizing. Get the sutures ready. 4 hours later, Winston woke with a sharp breath, his hand instinctively shooting toward his hip for a holster that wasn't there. Easy, a gentle hand caught his wrist. It was a young man in a medical coat. I'm Dr. Ren. You flatlined on my table, detective. You shouldn't have survived. It was your alpha cellular density that kept you alive. Winston, he grunted, his voice dry as sandpaper. Homicide. The door hissed open and Frederick walked in, followed by Cole and Leo. Detective Winston, Frederick spoke, his deep voice filling the room. You saved my brother's life. In the Vanguard, we're family. We don't forget a debt like that. But you stepped into a war you were never meant to see. I've been in this war for 3 months, Winston growled, sitting up despite the ache. Since Warehouse 9. My precinct called them gas leaks. I called bullshit. Cole crossed his arms, his storm gray eyes narrowing. You tracked 7 purge sites? Alone? Yes, Winston said flatly. But it's not just the ash. 12 men have vanished in the last 6 months. Boxers. Underground fighters. Men built like brick walls. No ransom, no bodies. Just gone. A heavy silence fell. Cole's jaw clenched as a dark memory of the Sector 4 fighting pit surfaced. The stench of damp iron and the blood-soaked dirt where Dr. Vance broke warriors for sport. I am betting they aren't just feeding, Cole whispered, his voice dark with fury. Vance is using them. The syndicate is probably taking peak human specimens and forcing them through conversion. They're building a front line of human hulks. Heavy infantry. Leo swore under his breath. If they're building a front line, Spire 4 isn't just a fortress, it's a factory. Frederick looked down at Winston, taking in the detective's stubborn grit and the months of intelligence he had gathered on his own. He realized then that the Vanguard didn't just find a witness, they found the missing piece of their war. Detective Winston, Frederick said, stepping toward the bed. You just filled in the missing piece of our puzzle. The creatures you saw tonight are the Syndicate, a vampire faction trying to take this city block by block. And we are the Vanguard. Winston looked from Frederick to Cole and finally to Ren, a dark smirk touching the jagged scar on his jaw. Vampires, Winston muttered, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed and ignoring the sharp pull of the sutures in his side. Well, that explains why forensics couldn't read the ash. He looked Frederick dead in the eye, his expression hardening with a lethal resolve. You guys need a detective who knows the city's grid better than the back of his hand. And I need the bastards who turned my streets into a hunting shadows ground. In the war room. Sounds like the morning sun broke through the heavy industrial smog in thin, pale rays, casting long shadows across the concrete floors of the Vanguard compound armory. The air was cold, carrying the distinct sense of gun oil, fresh Kevlar, and ozone. Winston stood in front of a steel-framed mirror, carefully rotating his right shoulder to test the pull across his ribs. Beneath the dark gray tactical undershirt provided by Frederick's logistics team, Dr. Ren's surgical sutures held firm. He strapped on his heavy leather shoulder holster, sliding his customized sidearm into place, before pulling on a tailored Vanguard field jacket. His precinct phone vibrated on the steel workbench. The caller ID flashed, Lieutenant Miller Homicide. Winston swiped the screen. Miller. Winston. Where the hell are you? Miller's voice crackled through the speaker over the relentless clattering of the squad room. Internal Affairs is crawling all over my desk regarding that alleyway mess in Sector 3. Forensics found a sheared metal door, bullet casings, and enough blood to paint a hallway, but 0 bodies. And your cruiser was found abandoned 2 blocks away. I got jumped, Winston replied smoothly, leaning one hand against the workbench. Took a blade to the ribs. Some mugger high on synthetic dust. Silence stretched over the line before Miller let out a raspy sigh. You sound like hell, Winston. I can't have IA nosing around while you're limping on shift. Which is why I'm calling in my accumulated time, Winston said, staring at his reflection. Unpaid medical leave. Effective immediately. 30 days. 30 days? Fine, Miller grunted. But keep your nose out of Sectors 3 and 4. Precinct Brass wants those zones quiet. Understood, Winston said, ending the call. Smart play, A warm voice called from the doorway. Leo was leaning against the frame with an easy grin. IA stays off your back and you keep your badge. Come on. Frederick wants us in the command hub. Winston grabbed his rolled ledger of blueprints and followed Leo down the subterranean corridor. As they rounded the corner into the training hall, they saw Dr. Ren in light gear, attempting a swift sparring kick against Cole. Cole sidestepped the move effortlessly, caught Ren by the waist and pulled him flush against his chest. Before Ren could protest, Cole dipped his head and kissed him squarely on the lips. Ren flushed a deep red, swatting at Cole's shoulder. Cole, we're in the middle of a drill. Leo let out a loud, dramatic throat clear. Some of us are trying to give the new guy a professional tour. Cole didn't let go. He just turned his head with a smug, relaxed smirk. Get your own love life, Leo, and stop crashing my sweet moments. Ignore my brother. Leo laughed as Ren hit his face against Cole's shoulder. Recovery looks weird on him. Winston let out a low rumble of a chuckle. Looks to me like he's doing just fine. They entered the Vanguard Command Center, a sprawling war room centered around a holographic tactical table. Commander Frederick stood at the head of the display. Detective. I trust Dr. Ren's medical clearance holds. I've worked through worse, Winston said, unrolling his paper maps directly over the digital projection. These are the purge sites, Winston explained, pointing to a cluster of red ink. 7 of them over 3 months. Someone was clearing out local gangs to build a perimeter, but we couldn't pinpoint the center. Cole stepped up beside Ren, his arm resting over Ren's shoulder as he stared at the map. And the missing persons? 12 guys, Winston said. Boxers, dock movers, underground brawlers. Big men who can take a punch. They were pulled right off the street. Cole's expression darkened with a lethal edge. It makes sense. Malachar lost his best pure-blood enforcers at Warehouse 9. He's desperate for muscle, so Vance is taking physically capable humans and forcing corruption down their throats. Will those conversions even hold? Leo asked. They're volatile as hell, Cole replied grimly. It doesn't make a soldier. It turns them into an unpredictable, raging brute. They won't live long, but Malachar doesn't care. He just wants a front line of heavy hitters to throw at us while he hides. Frederick stared at the converging red markings on Winston's map, his eyes tracing the empty, quiet space in the center. They're keeping their main processing facility hidden, he observed, his voice low and calculating. But this data narrows our search grid drastically. They're operating somewhere within Sector 4's sub-level infrastructure. Winston pulled a silver tactical data drive from his pocket, his official police access key, and set it on the console next to Leo. I've got the precinct blueprint overrides for the entire sub-level sewer and abandoned utility network beneath Sector 4, Winston said, a dark, knowing smirk touching his face. If Vance is hiding a laboratory or a processing center down there, my access keys will lead us right to the power drain. You can't run a conversion lab without drawing massive amounts of juice. Frederick nodded firmly, a look of grim satisfaction crossing his features. Then our priority is intelligence gathering. Leo cross-referenced Winston's access keys with the Sector 4 grid power surges. We find where Vance is pulling voltage and we find their hidden lair. As Leo's fingers flew across the holographic interface, the 3D model of the city began to pulse with new data. The hunt was no longer a blind chase through the rain. For the first time in months, the Vanguard had a target. Chapter 5, The Blood Weaver's Patience. Deep beneath the rusted foundations of Sector 4, inside a cavernous chamber lit only by flickers of bioluminescent tubes, Lord Malachar stood motionless. His silhouette was tall and regal, his skin the pale off-white of bleached bone. Across the floor, heavy iron cages rattled violently. Inside, once human brawlers slammed hypermuscular fists against the bars, their veins bulging black and eyes glowing a corrupted yellow. Vance stepped out, wiping grease from her hands. The forced pureblood strains are bonding, my lord. But mortality remains high. Malachar didn't turn. His voice was a low baritone that vibrated like grinding velvet. Mortality is irrelevant, Dr. Vance. Muscle is replaceable. Time is not. He traced a trail of blood on a cage with a clawed finger. The Vanguard thinks they have backed us into the dark. They do not realize the dark is where I weave my finest nets. When they come hunting, they will find their grave. Meanwhile, back at the Vanguard compound, Winston stood in the training ring opposite Leo, who was bouncing on his toes with a playful smirk. Vampires don't fight like precinct muggers, Leo teased, raising his sparring gloves. We're faster, stronger, and we don't telegraph. I'll go easy on your ribs. Don't hold back, Winston grunted, his sharp eyes tracking Leo's weight. I've been taking down guys twice my size for 15 years. Leo darted forward, a blurring flash of inhuman speed. But Winston's instincts were razor sharp. He ducked, caught Leo's forearm, and used the vampire's own momentum to pivot, driving a hard elbow toward Leo's ribs. Leo gasped, barely blocking the hit. Okay, he chuckled. You actually move. Before Winston could reply, Leo closed the distance, slipping past his guard to attempt a hip toss. They collided hard, rolling across the mat until they came to a sudden halt. Winston pinned beneath Leo, arms trapped. Both men were breathing heavily, chests heaving against each other. Got you, Leo murmured. Winston opened his mouth to snap back, but the words died. Leo was hovering mere inches away. As Leo exhaled, his warm breath brushed against Winston's jaw. In that second, an intoxicating scent hit Winston. Crushed cardamom, scorched amber, and an electric heat. A sudden, magnetic pull hit Winston in the center of his chest. His heart hammered. Leo's grin faltered, his own breathing hitching as the air shifted. His gaze dipped to Winston's lips before snapping back to his eyes, the banter evaporating into a heavy, crackling tension. Neither moved. Neither pulled away. Late that night, Winston lay awake on his steel cot, staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, that magnetic surge hit him again. 15 years on the streets, 15 years of cold survival, and no one had ever gotten under his skin like this. I can't, Winston thought, his jaw clenching. I'm a homicide cop with blood on my boots. How the hell am I supposed to touch something like that? He rolled onto his side, the scent of cardamom and amber still trapped in his lungs, while the quiet pull in his chest refused to let him go. Chapter 6, Tactics, Taunts, and Tough Love. The Vanguard compound's sub-level combat ring was brutal, cold, and loud. The stench of sweat, ozone, silver polish, and gun oil hung thick in the air, but by 0600 hours, the cavernous space was already roaring with noise. In the center of the reinforced mat, Cole was putting Ren through a merciless close-quarters drill. Ren, sleek, fast, and constantly smirking, ducked under Cole's massive left hook, sweeping his leg out in a blurring arc. But Cole didn't even flinch. The heavy Vanguard leader absorbed the kick against his armored thigh like he was made of solid granite, grabbed Ren by the back of his tactical vest, and effortlessly tossed him 5 feet across the mat onto his back. Too slow, Ren. Cole barked, stepping over him with a broad, arrogant grin, his storm gray eyes bright. You're dropping your guard every time you try to look pretty. Don't let him fool you, detective, Ren called out, sitting up and pointing a finger at Cole with a sharp grin. He acts all tough, but the gargoyle's gone soft ever since he brought me home. He spends half his briefings writing poetry about me in his head. Look at him. He hasn't even threatened to rip my throat out once this morning. Cole snatched a heavy wooden training stake off the rack and hurled it straight at Ren's head. Ren caught it inches from his nose with a sharp snap of his wrist, chuckling softly. Keep running your mouth, mate, Cole growled, stepping over to press a heavy hand against the back of Ren's neck, giving him a firm, protective squeeze. Oh, please, Ren scoffed, leaning his head back into Cole's touch for a split second. You practically purr when I walk into the room. It's disgusting. The legendary Vanguard commander, reduced to my giant, protective golden retriever. Leo stepped out from the equipment locker, tossing a fresh roll of white grip tape straight at Ren's chest. You're both disgusting, actually. Cole hasn't stopped growling every time someone walks within 5 feet of you, and you look like a satisfied cat. A chorus of deep, echoing laughter bounced off the concrete walls. And don't get me started on Cole's pre-mission speeches, Leo smirked. Half of them sound like he's trying to figure out how to carry you over a threshold while wearing 50 pounds of tactical Kevlar. Careful, little brother, Cole warned, though a faint flush rose above his dark collar as he kept his hand anchored on Ren's neck. Leo moved with fluid grace toward Winston's bench. Dressed in a dark fitted tactical shirt, he looked immaculate. But as he stepped past the weapon racks, his amber eyes flicked toward Winston with an intense focus that didn't escape the room. Ren caught the shift instantly. A wicked grin spread across his face as he leaned back against Cole's chest. Well, Ren purred. Look who's throwing jabs. You've been awfully attentive to the precinct's finest yourself, haven't you, Leo? Strapping his armor. I didn't know training came with personal valet service. Winston's jaw clenched hard enough to pop. From his seat on the bench, he raised his head slowly to lock dark, lethal eyes onto Ren. Keep talking and I'll test out these silver hollow points on your shins. Ren, Leo said, his voice dropping into a low, terrifyingly quiet baritone that made the air in the gym freeze. Back on the mat. Now. Cole snorted, wiping his face with a towel. Let it go, Leo. He's just jealous. But the cop does look like he needs to learn how to keep a pure blood off his throat. Cole gestured to the weapon rack. Show him the strike angles, Leo. The way you're staring at him, you're going to distract him right into Vance's clutches. The room quieted into a heavy, charged hum as Leo tossed a wooden training stake to Winston. Winston caught it cleanly, turning his back on the grinning squad as Leo stepped directly into his personal space. Ignore them, Leo murmured. I've dealt with rowdy precinct squads for 15 years, Leo, Winston grunted. His calloused fingers brushed against Leo's warm skin, sending a sudden shockwave up his arm. Takes more than a few jabs from a loudmouth vampire to rattle me. Good, Leo whispered, stepping inside Winston's guard. Street muggers go for the chest to incapacitate. A pureblood doesn't care about a shot to the chest unless it's silver or would directly through the main ventricle. Without warning, Leo placed one warm, firm hand flat against Winston's lower hip, his other hand pressing against the small of Winston's back to adjust his posture. Winston went completely rigid. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, the contact was electric. The heat of Leo's palm burned like a white-hot iron. That intoxicating scent, crushed cardamom and scorched amber, flooded Winston's lungs. You're too stiff, detective, Leo murmured, leaning in until his breath brushed the shell of Winston's ear. Lean into the motion. Vampires don't telegraph. You aim the stake 2 inches left of the sternum, angled upward at 45 degrees to bypass the ribcage. Angle upward, Winston rasped, his voice rough and his pulse hammering against his ribs like a trapped beast. Bypass the bone. Exactly, Leo continued, his thumb unconsciously tracing a small, protective circle against Winston's hip before he caught himself and held firm. And speed is everything. We heal almost instantly from conventional damage. If you don't sever the carotid or pin the heart on the first strike, you're dead before you can draw a second weapon. Show me your stance. Winston swallowed hard, setting his boots shoulder-width apart and raising the stake into a tactical guard, though his dark, scarred face was only inches from Leo's pristine, noble features. The contrast between them was brutal, a battered, blood-stained human cop and a pure-blood aristocrat. Hard to focus on the geometry, Winston growled under his breath, when you're hovering over my neck like a hungry storm. A soft, low chuckle escaped Leo's throat, sending a shiver straight down Winston's spine. I thought you said you've been taking down guys twice your size for 15 years. None of them smelled like you, Winston muttered before he could catch himself. Leo's hands stilled on Winston's hips. For a long, silent second, neither of them moved. Leo's amber eyes flicked to Winston's profile, his breathing catching in his chest. The teasing air in the room completely evaporated, replaced by that heavy, magnetic pull that threatened to pull them under. Winston turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto Leo's, finding a desire in Leo's gaze that was raw and unshielded. A faint, dangerous smirk touched Leo's lips, his amber eyes darkening with a sudden, unshielded hunger that made Winston's heart slam against his ribs. Then get used to the storm, detective. Because when we go into Sector 4 tonight, I'm staying right on your hip. Cole tossed a heavy silver-plated sidearm onto the bench beside them with a loud clack, breaking the suffocating tension. Transport leaves at dusk, Cole called out, his tone shifting back into the authoritative weight of a commander. Finish your drills, gear up and get your minds right. Vance isn't playing around down there. Leo slowly withdrew his hands, though his gaze never left Winston's face. Keep the stake, detective, Leo whispered softly, his voice full of quiet promise as he stepped back. You're going to need it tonight. Chapter 7, Shadows, Smog and Mortality. By midnight, the upper docks of Sector 4 were draped in a thick, sulphurous river fog that smelled of rusted iron and rot. High above the silent shipping containers, Winston and Leo crouched side by side on the narrow steel catwalk of a rusted crane tower. The wind off the water was freezing, whipping Winston's heavy tactical coat, but beside him, Leo didn't even shiver. Winston scanned the empty black expanse of Warehouse 12 through his tactical glasses. Nothing, he grunted. No sentries on the perimeter. Vance pulled his boys inward. He's fortifying the substation, Leo said smoothly, his amber eyes cutting effortlessly through the gloom. The quiet between them felt vast. Winston stared at his calloused knuckles, the weight of the afternoon in the training ring still heavy on his mind. The scent of cardamom and scorched amber enveloped him, suffocating and impossibly warm in the freezing wind. Stop looking at me like that, Winston muttered. Like what? Leo asked softly. You don't understand, Leo. You see the badge. You see someone useful. Winston gave a humorless laugh. But you don't know what I was like before this. You don't see what's really standing next to you. Leo remained silent, tracking the dark shadow of stubble along Winston's jawline. In the ring today, watching you move. You guys are built like gods, Winston said, his voice carrying a raw seriousness. You take a bullet, you heal. But me? I'm a homicide cop with bad lungs, scarred ribs, and 15 years of alley blood under my fingernails. I take a round to the chest down there and I'm done. I don't get a second wind. Winston looked down at his scarred hands. I was a pain in the ass long before I got this badge. Wayward. Unruly. I broke rules because I thought they were for people who didn't know the real world. I was so busy proving I didn't need anyone that I couldn't see how badly I needed them. He looked back at Leo, vulnerability raw in his dark eyes. You're a pure blood. You've got centuries of bloodline behind you. Then there's me, mortal, broken, and running on borrowed time. I don't know why you keep looking at me like I'm worth something. Leo reached out slowly and rested a warm hand against Winston's shoulder. Then perhaps, Leo said quietly, you've spent too long listening to your own version of yourself. I don't see a man who is unworthy. I see a man who has spent 15 years walking into dangerous places because someone else needed him to. I see someone stubborn, infuriating, and occasionally impossible. A faint smile touched Winston's mouth. Occasionally? Frequently, Leo corrected. After a quiet laugh escaped Winston, Leo became serious again. I know what you are, Winston. I know every scar and every mortal risk. I don't need you to be immortal or perfect. I chose you as you are. Winston stared at him, the words settling deeper than any fear of dying. He closed his large, calloused hand around Leo's wrist. That's the part that scares me most, he admitted softly. Because if you really mean that, then I might actually have something worth losing. Chapter 8, Steel, Silver, and Smoke. The drop from the crane tower was silent. Leo landed in a low crouch, his coat snapping in the freezing river wind. Winston hit the pavement a second later with a heavy, booted thud, rolling through the impact and coming up with his silver-plated sidearm raised. Cole detached from the shadows near the perimeter wall, his radio earbud humming with static. I'm in position on the south perimeter, Ren's voice filtered through the comms, calm and clinical. Medical rig is hidden 2 blocks out. Don't bring me back any bodies I can't stitch together, Cole. Stay in the transport dock, Cole muttered, his tone clipped and protective. We're clearing the floor. Keep the engine running. The team moved in a tight wedge. Inside, Warehouse 12 was a dark maze of shipping pallets and iron pipes. A dozen vampire mercenaries were scattered across the floor, inventorying crates. The moment Cole kicked the steel door off its rusted frame, the vault erupted. These weren't recruits, they were seasoned predators moving with terrifying speed. Vanguard, a mercenary yelled, drawing a combat blade. Before Cole could clear the threshold, 2 vampires hit him. He slammed one against a crate, but the second lunged from his blind spot, sinking a knife deep into Cole's shoulder. To the left, a heavy-set vampire vaulted over a forklift, crashing into Leo and pinning him against a concrete pillar. Winston didn't hesitate. He squeezed his trigger twice, dropping the mercenary off Leo with 2 silver rounds to the kidney. I'm good. Leo choked out, shaking off the hit and diving back into the fray. Gunfire chewed through the metal above Winston's head as he ducked behind an iron beam. Suddenly, a shadow dropped from the high catwalks, a silver-tipped blade aimed straight at Cole's exposed neck. Winston swung his firearm wide, tracking the shadow in a fraction of a second. A single snapshot hit the diver in the temple, sending him crashing lifelessly to the floor. Cole glanced over his shoulder, breath coming in jagged rasps as blood leaked down his arm. He gave Winston a single sharp nod of grim respect. Thanks, detective. Pay me later, Winston grunted. Within minutes, the clash died down to an echoing quiet, leaving the warehouse smelling of cordite and burned ash. Cole dragged the sole surviving supervisor off the ground, pinning him by his neck. Ren, we've got one alive. Cole, why are you breathing like that? Ren's voice cut through with an edge of panic. Are you hit? It's nothing, Doc, Cole lied. Do not lie to me. Ren snapped. I know what your breath sounds like when you're hurt. Report. Cole grunted, pressing the silver-plated barrel of his gun against the guard's kneecap. Where's Malachar? The guard shrieked as the silver seared his flesh. The iron works. Sub-level 3 under the foundry in Sector 9. That's where the portal is. Cole knocked him cold and turned to Winston and Leo. The old ironworks. Then we burn this place, Winston said, tossing incendiary charges onto the smuggled contraband. He primed the timers with a sharp click. 30 seconds. Doc, have the medical kit open. We're burning the vault. They limped out into the cold night just as the warehouse windows blew outward in a roaring wall of fire. The vault was gone, and their sights were set on Sector 9. Chapter 9, Heartbeats, Hemlock and Heavy Air. The interior of Ren's medical rig smelled of rubbing alcohol and silver burn neutralizer. Rain rattled against the roof in a steady hum as the vehicle sat hidden in a dark alley. Hold still, you stubborn brute, Ren muttered, applying a silver-repelling salve to the gash on Cole's shoulder. Cole sat on the edge of the steel table, chest bare and jaw flexed. I'm holding still, document. You're breathing like a freight train, Ren said, his voice clipped as he pulled a suture tight. If you take another blade to the shoulder, I'm letting you stitch yourself. Cole reached up, his large fingers wrapping around Ren's wrist to quiet his hands. You won't. Ren let out a soft, defeated breath, holding Cole's gaze. No, I won't. Just stop letting mercenaries get the drop on you. Cole tapped his comm unit. Commander Frederick, come in. Reading you, Cole, Frederick's authoritative voice answered. Is the vault clear? Vault is ash, Cole reported. Malachar and Vance are at the old ironworks in Sector 9. They're setting up the main portal now. Then we move in force, Frederick replied. I'll lead the main assault team to your position. At the rear bay doors, Winston leaned against the bumper watching the rain. Beside him, Leo rested a shoulder against the frame, his dark hair damp from the river mist. Now that the adrenaline was ebbing, their biological pull began to flood the void, two massive forces locking together. Leo reached out, his fingers catching Winston's chin. You took a hard blow earlier. Winston didn't pull away. I've taken harder hits from drunk dockworkers. That doesn't mean I enjoyed watching it, Leo murmured, stepping closer until their boots touched. The concentrated heat from Leo's chest hit Winston like a wave, and the scent of scorched amber and cardamom became intoxicating. Winston's pulse hammered, but his gaze remained steady. He refused to surrender an inch. You're projecting, he growled. Your scent is getting stronger. So is yours, Leo whispered. Winston's pheromones flared, the scent of rain, worn leather, and tobacco. The two scents collided, neither overpowering the other. Winston tightened his hand around the back of Leo's neck and pulled him closer until their foreheads touched. I'm an alpha, he murmured. What did you expect? We move on Sector 9 in 30 minutes, Winston added softly against Leo's lips. I know, Leo whispered. Which is why I'm keeping you close right now. An hour later, the Vanguard transports rolled into position at the Sector 9 ironworks. Frederick signaled the breach while Winston and Leo walked side by side through the night. Every time their shoulders brushed, their blended scents flared. Leo reached out, adjusting a strap on Winston's vest. His hand lingered on Winston's hip. A loose strap can cost you half a second in a doorway, he corrected smoothly. Winston let out a rough laugh and straightened Leo's lapel, his thumb brushing Leo's cheekbone. I'm not going anywhere, Leo, he said. Not tonight. Leo swallowed hard, resting his forehead against Winston's for a quiet heartbeat as the breaching charges were primed. Hold on to that promise, Winston. Because when we cross that threshold, we finish this together. Winston gave him a sharp, pitch-black cop smile. Let's go to work. Chapter 10, Steel, Ash, and Sacrifice. The thunderous roar of Vanguard breaching charges shattered the subterranean stillness of Sector 9, blowing the main blast doors into twisted, white-hot shrapnel. Firestorm pressure waves ripped through the entry hall as three heavy Vanguard strike squads surged into the heart of the Syndicate stronghold. Suppression fire. Burn the gun nests. Commander Frederick roared over the thunder of heavy artillery, his rifle spitting rapid silver-tipped rounds. Beside him, assault units locked shields against a wave of frantic Syndicate defenders. Above the central arena, fire rained from ruptured gas conduits. The facility was a nightmare of iron and shadow, a massive sunken gladiator pit where captive fighters roared against their restraints. Cole leaped over a burning barricade, dual combat blades drawn. Cole to Vanguard lead. Upper gantries are swarming. Securing the high ground. Go! Frederick bellowed. Ren forward triage behind second squad. Hold this threshold. Medics moving. Ren commanded, diving behind a stone pillar as automatic fire tore through the air. Deep in the lower pit, the air was suffocating, thick with ozone and raw blood. At the elevated dais stood Dr. Vance and Lord Malachar, backed by a dozen massive, heavily armored pure-blood gladiators. Kill them all. Vance shrieked. Release the caged alphas. Flood the floor. Vanguard. Leo's voice thundered, his amber eyes flashing with lethal fire. Beside him, Winston moved with deadly precision, racking the slide of his silver-plated sidearm. The main clash hit like two freight trains colliding. Winston and Leo fought shoulder to shoulder, a terrifying vortex of alpha power. Winston emptied his clip into an oncoming brute before vaulting over a fallen pillar to crush another defender's throat. Beside him, Leo moved like a blur of shadow, his blade carving through the opposition in a relentless storm. High above on the central catwalk, Lord Malachar moved with terrifying speed. He hit Cole like a kinetic warhead. Their blades struck with an explosive crack, the impact sending shockwaves through Cole's spine. Malachar's heavy gauntlet caught Cole flush across the jaw, sending him skidding across the gantry. "You're a hound playing at being a hunter, Vanguard?" Malachar snarled. Cole spat blood. "Then come put down the dog, you oversized leech." Cole executed a lightning-fast combination, but Malachar was an ancient warlord. He blocked the strikes and slammed Cole face-first into the iron railing, shattering Cole's visor. Blood poured into Cole's eye, but he drove his elbow into Malachar's ribs. Malachar didn't back off. He drove a heavy silver dagger straight through Cole's left shoulder. Cole screamed, a raw, agonized sound, as silver burn tore through him. Malachar lifted him by the throat, pinning him against the burning gantry. "Your blood will feed the pit," he growled, raising his broadsword. "Not today," Cole wheezed. With the last of his momentum, Cole unlatched an incendiary grenade, pulled the pin with his teeth, and shoved it directly into Malachar's cracked armor. The thermite charge detonated at point-blank range. White-hot plasma tore through the armor, blasting Malachar 50 feet down to the arena floor in a shower of sparks and shrapnel. Cole collapsed, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Leo, he's down, finish it." Below, Malachar staggered to his feet, badly burned. Leo dropped from the upper rafters like a falling meteor. Before the warlord could raise a sword, Leo landed, caught Malachar's wrists and snapped them like dry twigs. He then drove his combat blade straight under Malachar's chin, pushing the silver steel through his skull. Malachar stiffened, his eyes locking onto Leo's for one final second before dissolving into a cloud of burning ash. Across the pit, Dr. Vance realized her line had collapsed. With a hysterical scream, she opened fire. Leo closed the gap instantly, caught her wrist in a crushing grip, and drove his blade through her chest. Vance gasped, blood pooling at her lips, before collapsing lifeless onto the arena floor. "It's over," Leo shouted into the haze, turning toward Winston. "Winston, secure the cage controls." Suddenly, the mechanical grinding of heavy steel echoed through the burning pit. From the shadow of a fortified sniper nest above the cages, a massive, cybernetically altered Alpha Executioner, the Syndicate's Grand Pit Master, rose from the smoke. In his hands was a mounted, heavy silver-forged siege ballista, used to put down enraged arena beasts. The ballista locked onto Leo's back. Winston saw it. He had less than a heartbeat to decide. And for once in his life, there was nothing complicated about the choice. "Leo." Winston threw himself forward. Thwack. The massive silver bolt tore through the air with catastrophic force. It punched straight through Winston's heavy tactical armor, shattering his chest plate and pinning him into the stone pillar behind him. Winston gasped, a violent, wet choke, as dark crimson blood erupted from his mouth. "No!" Leo's roar shook the chamber. Moving with apocalyptic speed, Leo vaulted 50 feet up the gantry wall, reached the sniper nest and tore the executioner limb from limb. He dropped back to the arena floor, sliding through the blood to reach Winston's side. "Winston, look at me." Leo's hands hovered frantically over the iron shaft protruding from Winston's chest. Winston's skin was turning ash gray. His dark eyes flickered, struggling to stay focused on Leo's face. "Don't you dare," Winston whispered, his calloused fingers clutching Leo's collar with the last of his strength. "Think I regretted choosing you. Don't speak." Leo's voice shattered. "Medics. Ren, get down here." Ren scrambled down, dropping into the blood-soaked dirt. He looked at the massive wound and the black, oxidized blood spreading around the silver. His face drained of color. "It pierced the heart," Ren whispered. "The silver is eating through his organs. Human medicine can't repair this. He has seconds." "I can't." Ren cried as Leo bellowed for him to fix it. "There's nothing left to stitch." Winston's hand began to slip from Leo's coat. "Ren, get back," Leo commanded, his voice dropping into a deep, vibrating frequency. "Step back," Leo roared. With a single fluid motion he slashed his own wrist. He leaned over Winston, cradling his neck, and pressed his bleeding wrist over Winston's lips. "Drink," Leo sobbed, his forehead pressing against Winston's cold skin. "Drink, Winston. I'm not letting you go. Drink." Winston's throat swallowed instinctively, once, twice. Gulping down the hot, the supernatural blood flooded his system just as his chest gave one last, shallow shudder. Beneath Leo's hand, Winston's heart gave one final, faint beat, and went completely still. Chapter 11, The Alpha's Bond. The silence in the Vanguard vault was heavy. On the hospital bed, Winston lay motionless. The fatal wound had closed into a dark, smooth scar, but his flesh remained marble cold. Beside the bed, Leo sat in absolute silence, his amber eyes locked on Winston's pale face. Exactly 24 hours later, Winston's body convulsed. His eyes snapped open, wide and wild. He sat bolt upright on the bed, gasping, a harsh, desperate drag of air that rattled through his chest. His pupils dilated until the dark brown was swallowed by shadow. Supernatural life flooded his dead nervous system. "Leo," Winston choked out, clutching his head as his senses violently detonated. The low hum of the ceiling lights sounded like thunder. The smell of copper hit his tongue like hot iron. Inside his mouth, a sharp, aching pressure flared as fangs pushed down for the first time. Leo grabbed his shoulders, holding him steady as Winston gripped the edges of the mattress, his body trembling. "Stay with me," Leo commanded, his hands firm on Winston's shoulders. "Look at me, Winston." Winston raised his head, his chest heaving, his dark eyes wide with terror as he pressed a trembling hand over his chest, feeling the utter lack of a heartbeat inside. "I'm dead," Winston rasped. He looked down at his trembling hands resting on the bedsheets, then up at Leo. "My heart isn't beating. I gave you my blood just before your heart gave out." "My blood started the transformation in Sector 9, Leo said quietly, reaching down to catch Winston's face in both of his hands, forcing the detective to look straight into his amber eyes. "But your body hasn't completed it. You need one final exchange of blood to cross the threshold permanently." Winston clamped his jaw shut as an agonizing, bone-deep fire ignited in his throat, a violent, unquenchable thirst that made his jaw ache with predatory instinct. He pressed his back hard against the vault wall, his muscles trembling violently as his fangs fully extended. "I can't," Winston gasped, his dark eyes wide with desperation. "Pure blood will complete your transition and lock our bond permanently," Leo interrupted, his thumb brushing over Winston's trembling lower lip, catching on the tip of his thumb. "No more limbo. No more mortality standing between us." Leo pulled back his high collar, exposing the strong line of his neck and throat. The intense, intoxicating scent of pure blood alpha pheromones erupted into the enclosed vault, thick, heavy, and sweet. Leo's scent hit him with overwhelming force, but Winston's own alpha instincts answered immediately, pushing back with equal intensity as two distinct alpha signatures met and recognized each other in the dark. Winston looked up, staring into Leo's eyes as the last lingering shadow of his unworthiness finally shattered. "You chose me when I was human," Winston whispered, his voice steadying. "You would have chosen me anyway." "Every time," Leo answered without a second's hesitation. Driven by an irresistible, soul-deep pull between equals, Winston wrapped his arms around Leo's waist, pulling the pure blood flush against his chest. Leo tilted his head back, his fingers tangling into Winston's dark hair. "Take it, Winston. Complete the feed." Winston leaned in, his lips brushing against the warm skin of Leo's neck. He gave one final look into Leo's eyes, finding absolute, unwavering devotion, before sinking his fangs deep into Leo's throat. A sharp gasp broke from Leo's lips as the powerful bite connected. The moment the hot, potent pure blood hit Winston's tongue, the agonizing burn in his throat vanished, replaced by an explosive, staggering wave of power. It felt like liquid lightning coursing straight through his dead veins, restarting every nerve ending, binding his soul directly to Leo's supernatural frequency. Leo wrapped his arms tightly around Winston, pulling him impossibly closer as their two alpha signatures locked together. Under Winston's palm, the permanent bond snapped into place, an unbreakable, immortal tether forged in blood and fire. Leo pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against Winston's, their shared breath mingling in the dark as the frantic hunger finally faded into complete, absolute peace. Epilogue: The Eclipse. 3 months later. The subterranean gladiator rings of Sector 9 were long gone, replaced by a massive rehabilitation initiative directed from the heart of the Vanguard compound. In the medical wing, Ren monitored the final physical recoveries of the rescued fighters, while specialized Vanguard psychologists worked daily to help them unlearn the brutal conditioning of the pit. The outcome was undeniable. Nearly half of the freed gladiators chose to stay, joining the Vanguard to protect others, while the rest were safely returned to their families across the territories. Down in the precinct archives, Detective Winston's file was officially closed. Evidence left at the Sector 9 scene had provided indisputable proof for forensics to confirm his death in the line of duty. To the human world, the relentless detective was buried and honored. His mortal identity had reached its absolute end. High above the city, the high-rise terrace overlooking the skyline was silent under the deep silver moonlight. Inside the quiet sanctuary of the penthouse, Winston stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass, adjusting the cuffs of his dark coat. His reflection was sharp and commanding. His dark eyes now carried the subtle golden ring of pure blood power, reaching effortlessly across the sleeping city. But beneath the strength, Winston was still Winston. The wayward detective had finally learned something far more important than immortality. He had never needed to become someone else to deserve it. A pair of arms wrapped around his waist from behind, warm and familiar. Leo leaned his chin on Winston's shoulder, his amber eyes catching Winston's reflection. "You're quiet tonight," Leo murmured softly, his scent wrapping around Winston like a warm cloak. Winston leaned back into Leo's chest, taking a slow, deep breath, feeling the absolute stillness inside his own chest. A quiet that no longer felt like death but like eternal strength. "Just thinking," Winston replied, turning his head to press a soft kiss against Leo's jawline. "About how sure I was that my story ended in that pit." "Your human story ended," Leo corrected gently, turning Winston around in his arms to lock their fingers together. "Our story is just beginning." Winston looked down at their joined hands, the subtle golden ring in his dark eyes catching the silver moonlight. A quiet warmth settled over him, a peaceful certainty that wiped away every ghost of his past. He smiled, a soft, tender edge softening his features, and pulled Leo flush against his chest. Leaning in, Winston brushed his lips softly against Leo's, feeling the steady, immortal pulse of the man who had given him a second chance at life. The kiss deepened, warm, fierce, and full of an unspoken promise that defied time itself. As they pulled back, resting forehead to forehead, the dark night stretched out before them, endless and immortal. The end.